Hello, this is Miss Alexander at Mercer Middle School, and I'm going to go over the 7th grade interim assessment that students recently took. Make sure you have your interim in front of you and you're going over your results step by step and finding your mistakes in order to learn from them. And don't forget to go in with Mr. Tesseroni, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Kochevar, or Miss Allen to retake your test for any sections that you were struggling with. All right, so here we go. Over summer break, your uncle and aunt ask you to help them cement the foundation for their new house. After 2 hours of laying down cement, they had used 5 bags of cement. So that's a rate. What is the rate at which you are laying cement bags per hour? So we have 2 hours and 5 bags. So we're going to say how many bags per hour was the rate that was given. So we've got 5 bags of cement from the story for every 2 hours spent laying down cement. So it says, what is the rate? That is the rate, 5 bags for 2 hours. If we were asked what the unit rate was, we could then simplify this and say a unit rate is always, and I believe that was the next question. Let me check here. It's not on the paper here, but it says, what is the unit rate is the next question. So we have a unit rate is always for every 1. So we're trying to get from 2 hours to 1 hour. So if it was 2 hours for 5 bags, we have to divide by 2 to get from 2 hours to 1 hour. So to make an equivalent rate, we would have to then also divide number of bags by 2. So 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. And you can do that work over here. 5 divided by 2. 2 goes into 5 twice. 2 times 2 is 4. 5 minus 4 is there's 1 left. So we can add a decimal. And we'll say, we'll add a 0. So now 2 goes into 10 5 times. 2 times 5 is 10. And we have remainder 0. So 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. 5 divided by 2 is 2 1/2. Instead of 0.5, I'll put 2.5 bags in 1 hour. That was the unit rate. So we can also write that as an equation. That was part 3 of this question. So if we want an equation, this is a proportional relationship. So we have y equals kx. In this case, we have the number of bags of cement equals the unit rate times how many hours they were working for. So we have y equals blank x. This is any number of bags, and this is number of hours. So what is our unit rate? It was 2.5 bags an hour. So we have 2 1/2 times x. Y equals 2.5x. Also, though, we do have b and we have h. So let's change that to use the b and the h from the problem. So number of bags instead of y equals 2.5 bags per hour multiplied by the number of hours. So that would be our final answer. The number of bags of cement is going to be 2.5 bags multiplied by the number of hours. So we've started with a rate. We simplified to a unit rate. Let me label that as a unit rate. This was the unit rate. And then we used our unit rate to write an equation using b and h for bags and hours. So that was question 1. Make sure you took notes. Make sure you were thinking about your comparison of what you did on your problem to what you see on this problem. All right, question number 2. It is a Saturday morning, and Jeremy has discovered he has a leak coming from the water heater in his in his attic. Since plumbers charge extra to come out on weekends, Jeremy is planning to use buckets to catch the dripping water. He places a bucket under the drip and steps outside to walk the dog. In 2/3 of an hour, the bucket is 1/5 of the way full. I hear another rate. So they ask me, what is the rate at which the bucket is filling? So we have buckets per number of hours. That's going to be our rate. Comparing how many buckets for how many number of hours is a rate. So we're going to say, how many buckets do we have? We have 1/5 is what that says of a bucket for every, notice when I say for every, I'm drawing that line. A rate is a comparison of two objects or two numbers or two amounts with different units. So 1/5 of a bucket for every 2/3 of an hour, or 2/3 hours. Now what makes this one a little harder is that notice that we have a rate that involves two fractions. This actually says 1/5 divided by 2/3. That's what a fraction is, always just a division problem. So I'm going to rewrite this so I can solve this and make it into a unit rate, because that really is the unit rate right here. But I can actually simplify this to make it problem a little easier to understand. So we've got equals. What that really says is 1/5 multiplied by, or sorry, divided by 2/3. How do we solve that problem? You've learned in 7th grade math this year that you go stay, flip, flip is one way of expressing dividing fractions. So 1/5 stay, flip division to multiplication, and flip 2/3 to 3/2. So when we divide by a number, that's the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. So 1 times 3 is 3, and 5 times 2 is 10. So we have 3/10 of a bucket. I'll write that over here. 3/10 of a bucket per hour. You can write that as per hour, or you could have written that as 3/10 of a bucket per 1 hour. Those both mean the same thing. So let's look at the problem. It says, what is the rate at which the bucket is filling? It was filling at 1/5 of a bucket for 2/3 hours, and we simplified the fraction division and found it was 3/10 of a bucket per hour. That would be known as our unit rate. So let's look down here. How much time will it take for one bucket to fill with water? That's a slightly different question. Notice on this question, we found how much buckets for 1 hour. This time it's saying how much time for one bucket. That's a different question. It's with the same rate though. The rate is still 2/3 of an hour for 1/5 of a bucket full. So we're going to do some different math here, but notice we're using the same information. So we're going to use our original rate. Let me look up here. We had 1/5 of a bucket in 2/3 hours, but this time we want one bucket. So I'm actually going to put hours compared to buckets so that we can make buckets 1 and find out the number of hours. So how many hours for how many buckets? There were 2/3 hours for every 1/5 of a bucket. Now we want to figure out how much for one bucket. So just like we did up here, we found 3/10 buckets per hour. So we have 2/3 of an hour per 1/5 of a bucket. So to find out how much one bucket would be, there's a couple ways you could think about this. I have 1/5 of a bucket. I could just multiply by 5 to get to one whole bucket, and then multiply 2/3 by 5 to get to however number of hours. I'm not going to approach it that way though. What I'm going to do is find the unit rate by, and the unit rate's helpful because that will give me one bucket. I'm actually going to do this 2/3 divided by 1/5 in order to get my unit rate. So we're going to take 2/3, it says divided by 1/5, and I know that in order to divide two fractions, I'm going to take 2/3, stay, flip division, and flip 1/5. So dividing by 1/5 is the same as multiplying by 5/1. 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 1 is 3. So that tells me it is 10/3 over 1. Or I can think of this as 3 goes into, this is an improper fraction, 3 goes into 10 3 times, makes 9, there's 1 left over out of 3. So that is 3 1/3 hours for one bucket. So if I want to fill one bucket, it's going to take me 3 1/3 hours to do that. You could check over here. 1/5 times 5 is one bucket, and 5 times 2, 5 over 1 times 2/3 is 10 over 3. So 10/3 hours over 1 bucket. Same answer I got over here. That's it for that standard. So if you're studying for the first standard 7 RP1 for the first couple questions on your interim, you need to make sure you go over these problems, you think about each one of those, find your mistakes, and fix them. If you need extra help, make sure you're going in at lunch or after school program and asking your teachers before you take a retake. Thank you.